long time ago that people show you who they are fastest when they believe you have nothing to offer. That lesson came back to me the night I stepped into my daughter-in-law's parents' house, carrying a purse that cost less than their wine glasses. My son, Daniel, had always thought of me as simple, not unintelligent, just modest. I wore my old coats until the lining frayed. I drove a car that rattled when it idled. I never talked about money, never hinted at the truth, and because I lived quietly, he assumed my life had been quiet too. I never corrected him. You see, for the past 12 years, I've earned more in a month than most people make in a year. Consulting work, boring to explain, easy to hide, 40,000 a month, deposited like clockwork. Enough to live well, invest carefully, and still sleep peacefully at night. But I chose simplicity, not because I had to, but because it taught me things comfort never could. When Daniel married Lauren, I noticed how conversations shifted. Not with him, with them, her family. Questions about where I lived, what I did, how I managed on my own. Always polite, always smiling, but there was something underneath it all, a careful measuring. So, when Daniel invited me to dinner with Lauren's parents, I made a decision on the spot. I would go exactly as they already believed I was. No jewelry, no stories, no hints, just a tired-looking older woman with sensible shoes and a soft voice. I think you'll like them, Daniel said over the phone. They're accomplished. I smiled to myself. I'm sure they are. That afternoon, I chose my outfit deliberately. A plain cardigan, slacks I'd had for years, the purse I used for grocery shopping. I even left my watch at home, the one Daniel had never noticed, but would have recognized as expensive if he had. I wasn't trying to trick anyone. I was trying to observe. Lauren's parents lived in a large home on a manicured street, where every lawn looked trimmed by the same invisible hand. As Daniel parked the car, I took a slow breath, not nervous, curious. The door opened before we knocked. Her mother's smile was immediate, bright, evaluating. Her father's handshake was firm, brief, and already moving past me. Inside, the house was spotless, the kind of spotless that makes you afraid to sit down. As we walked through the living room, I felt eyes flick toward my shoes, my bag, the cut of my coat. I said very little. On purpose, at the dining table, conversation flowed easily around me: vacations, investments, a recent kitchen remodel. I nodded politely, asked gentle questions, kept my tone light. Then Lauren's mother turned to me and said, with a sympathetic smile that didn't reach her eyes, "So, do you still live alone?" Something in her voice made the word alone sound like a warning. "Yes," I replied, "I manage." Her father chuckled softly. "These days, that can't be easy." I smiled back. "No," I said, "it really shows you who people are." The table went quiet for half a second, just long enough, and that's when I knew dinner hadn't even begun yet. Because the real test was still coming, and I hadn't even touched my fork. By the time the first course was served, I could already feel the rules of the room settling into place. Lauren's parents spoke to my son as if he were an equal, asking his opinion, nodding thoughtfully, laughing a little too loudly at his jokes. When they spoke to me, their voices softened, slowed. The way people talk to someone they've already decided not to challenge. It wasn't cruelty. Not yet. It was something quieter and more revealing. Lauren's mother placed a small salad in front of me. "I hope this is okay," she said. "We're trying to eat lighter these days." "It's lovely," I replied sincerely. She smiled, then added, "Daniel tells us you've always been very practical." That word again. Practical. A polite way of saying limited. "I've always believed in living within my means," I said gently. Her father leaned back in his chair. "Smart," he said, "especially these days. You never know when support might dry up." Support. I glanced at Daniel. He was busy cutting his steak, unaware that the conversation had quietly shifted into something else entirely. I felt a small ache in my chest, not anger, just sadness. Not at them, but at how easily people build stories when you let them. As the meal continued, questions came dressed as concern. "Do you still work? Do you get by comfortably? Have you thought about downsizing someday?" Each one landed softly, but together they formed a shape I recognized well. They were placing me, not as family, not as an equal, but as someone to be managed. Lauren noticed too. I saw it in the way her smile tightened, the way she avoided my eyes. She knew this version of me wasn't the whole truth, but she didn't correct it either. And that told me something important. Midway through dinner, Lauren's father stood and poured himself more wine. "You know," he said casually, "we've been helping Daniel and Lauren think about their future. Property, investments, security." He gestured vaguely toward the room, as if success itself were inherited by proximity. "I told them it's important to build upward," he continued. "You can't afford sentimentality." Then he looked at me. "No offense," I nodded. "None taken." But inside, I felt a familiar tightening. The quiet knowledge that I was being dismissed, not because of who I was, but because of who they believed I wasn't. Dessert arrived. Lauren's mother pushed a small bowl toward me. "It's just a little something," she said. "We didn't want to overwhelm." I thanked her and took a bite. It was delicious, but I barely tasted it, because that's when Lauren's father said the thing that finally made everything clear. "Well," he said, folding his napkin, "it's good Daniel has us now. We'll make sure they don't have to worry." He smiled at my son, not at me, and in that moment, I understood exactly how this night would be remembered if I let it. I set my spoon down carefully, my hands steady. They thought this dinner was about introductions, about class, about positioning, but for me, it had become something else entirely. Because now that I'd seen how easily they underestimated me, I knew exactly what came next. There is a particular calm that settles over you when the truth becomes unavoidable. I felt it as I sat there, napkin folded in my lap, watching Lauren's parents speak about security as if it were something they alone could provide. They weren't being malicious. That was the strangest part. They genuinely believed they were offering reassurance, protecting their daughter from uncertainty. From me, I glanced at Daniel again. My sweet boy, so proud to be included in their world, nodding along as if he'd been waiting for this approval. He had no idea the price of it. Lauren excused herself to take a phone call, and the room shifted immediately. Her absence made space for a different tone, one less careful. You know, her mother said, lowering her voice slightly, we've always believed in helping family when it's appropriate. I waited. But it can become complicated, she continued, when expectations aren't clear. Her eyes flicked toward me, then back to her plate. I understand, I said quietly. Her father leaned forward. We're not unkind people, he said, as if preparing a defense. But we're realistic. At our age, planning matters, especially when adult children are involved. Involved how? I asked. He hesitated, just a moment, long enough to tell me he hadn't expected the question. Well, he said, choosing his words carefully, emergencies happen, and sometimes older parents need more assistance. There it was, not concern, calculation. I smiled politely. That's true, Lauren returned then, phone tucked away, and the conversation lifted again like a curtain pulled back into place. Laughter resumed. Coffee was poured, but the air had changed. For me, at least. As we prepared to leave, Lauren's mother hugged me gently, too gently, the way you hug someone you don't expect to see often. It was so nice to finally meet you, she said. You've raised such a responsible son. Thank you, I replied. I did my best. In the car, Daniel was cheerful. That went well, don't you think? Yes, I said, and I meant it, because now I knew. That night, back in my own quiet home, I sat at the small desk by the window and opened a folder I hadn't touched in years. Documents, accounts, property records, things I never talked about because I didn't need to. I wasn't angry. I wasn't hurt. I was clear. They had measured me by what they could see and decided I was small. They had assumed that kindness flowed one way and support the other, and maybe, if I were a different woman, I would have corrected them, cleared the misunderstanding, smoothed the awkwardness. But I had gone there for a reason. I wanted to know how they treated someone they believed had no leverage. Now I knew, and once you learn that about people, you don't forget it. I closed the folder and turned off the light. Because the next time we met, the rules would be very different. I didn't sleep much that night, not because I was upset, but because my mind wouldn't stop arranging what I'd learned into something useful. There's a difference between being insulted and being informed. Insults sting and fade. Information stays. Over the next few days, Daniel called more than usual. He talked about work, about plans he and Lauren were making, about how her parents had offered to help guide them. He sounded relieved, almost buoyant. I listened carefully, responding the way I always had, supportive, calm, asking questions that didn't challenge his excitement. I didn't mention the dinner. Not yet. Then came the call that shifted everything. Lauren rang me one afternoon, her voice polite but distracted. My parents were wondering, she said, if you'd be comfortable helping out a bit less once we start planning for a house. I let the silence stretch just long enough. Helping out how? I asked gently. Well, she said, you know, Daniel's been supporting you for years. They think it might be time for him to focus fully on his own family. Supporting me, I looked around my modest living room, the furniture I'd bought outright, the bills I'd never missed, the life I'd built quietly and independently. I see, I said. She rushed to fill the space. They don't mean anything bad. They just think it's practical. That word again. I've always managed my own affairs, I replied. But thank you for sharing their concern. We hung up shortly after. I sat there for a while, phone still in my hand, feeling something new rise in me, not anger, resolve. They hadn't just underestimated me. They'd rewritten my story and were already making plans around that version. That evening, I pulled out my notebook again. I wrote down what mattered, not emotionally, but strategically. What I owe, what I don't, what I'm willing to clarify, and what I'm not. I thought about Daniel, about how easily adult children accept narratives that make their lives simpler. I wasn't angry at him either. He'd believed what he'd seen. I'd shown him simplicity, and he'd assumed scarcity. That part was on me. A few days later, Lauren's parents invited us all to brunch. A casual gathering, they said, no pressure. I smiled when Daniel told me. I'd love to come. This time, though, I didn't choose my outfit to disappear. I still dressed simply, but intentionally. Clean lines, well-made fabric, nothing flashy, but nothing apologetic either, the kind of simplicity that doesn't ask permission. At brunch, the conversation returned quickly to finances. Housing markets, interest rates, planning ahead. Lauren's father turned to me and said, almost kindly, we've been thinking it might be wise for Daniel to help you explore some affordable options for the future. I met his eyes calmly. Thank you, I said, but I don't make decisions about my future without full information. He smiled, assuming agreement. What he didn't realize was that I'd just decided something important. I wasn't going to reveal the truth in a dramatic moment. I wasn't going to shame anyone. I was going to let their assumptions carry weight until they collapsed under their own confidence, and that moment was closer than any of them expected. There's a strange freedom that comes once you stop trying to correct people. I felt it settle into me during that brunch, as Lauren's parents spoke with the calm certainty of people who believed they were in charge. They talked about options and backup plans, about what would be best for everyone involved. All the while, they spoke around me, not to me, like I was a consideration, not a participant. I listened. I always listen. After brunch, Daniel walked me to my car. They mean well, he said, almost apologetically. They just worry about us starting out strong. I know, I replied. Worry can look a lot like control. He frowned slightly, but didn't argue. That evening, I received an email from Lauren's mother, warmly written, thoughtful in tone. Attached was a spreadsheet, a budget, not for Daniel and Lauren, for me, projected expenses, suggested limits, notes in the margins about downsizing possibilities and community resources. It was impressively detailed and completely unnecessary. I read it twice, then I closed my laptop and laughed softly to myself. They weren't cruel. They were convinced that money defined worth. That authority came from income, that those with less should be guided by those with more. They had no idea how ironic that belief was. The next day, I called my financial advisor, not because I needed advice, but because I wanted confirmation. We reviewed everything: assets, accounts, income streams. Nothing had changed. I was stable, comfortable, free. Is there something you're worried about? He asked. No, I said. I just wanted to remember. Remembering is powerful. Later that week, Daniel mentioned that Lauren's parents were planning a larger family gathering, a celebration of sorts, an engagement anniversary, perhaps. Everyone was invited. They'd really like you there, he said. It means a lot to them. I smiled. Then I'll be there. I knew what that gathering would be. It wouldn't be about love or family. It would be a display, a reminder of status, of hierarchy, of who held influence. And I would walk into it exactly as I was, no disguises, no announcements, no explanations, because the truth has a way of revealing itself when you stop forcing it. The night before the event, I laid out my clothes carefully, still modest, still understated, but unmistakably deliberate. Quality over flash, confidence without noise. I slept well. The next day, as I drove toward their home, I thought about how easily people mistake quiet for weakness. How often women my age are dismissed because we don't announce ourselves. But silence isn't absence. Sometimes it's observation, and sometimes it's patience. When I pulled into their driveway, I noticed unfamiliar cars, guests, witnesses. I took a deep breath, stepped out of my car, and walked toward the door, not to prove anything, but knowing that before the day was over, every assumption in that house would be tested. The house was already humming when I stepped inside. Voices layered over one another, glasses clinked. Music played softly in the background, something elegant and forgettable. Lauren's parents greeted me warmly, but I noticed how quickly their attention shifted back to the guests they considered important: business associates, longtime friends, people whose names carried weight. I was shown to a seat near the end of the room, not deliberately rude, just placed. I watched as introductions were made. Careers were exchanged like currency. Achievements were praised openly. When someone asked me what I did, Lauren's mother answered for me before I could speak. She lives very simply, she said with a smile. Always has, I nodded, as if that were the whole story. Daniel stayed close to Lauren, clearly trying to belong in this world of polished confidence. I felt a familiar tug in my chest, not disappointment, just understanding. We all want to be seen as enough. At some point, Lauren's father raised his glass. We're grateful, he announced, to be surrounded by people who understand the value of building something lasting. Applause followed. Then he continued, especially when it comes to supporting family in the right ways. His eyes flicked toward me for half a second. No one else noticed. Dinner was served buffet style, and I moved slowly through the line. Behind me, I overheard two women whispering. Is that Daniel's mother? Yes, she doesn't have much, I hear. Oh, well, at least she raised him well. I didn't turn around. I carried my plate to the table and sat quietly, letting the hum of conversation flow past me. And then, unexpectedly, a man took the seat across from me. He was older than most of the guests, dressed simply, his demeanor calm. He smiled kindly. Mind if I join you? He asked. Not at all, I said. We spoke lightly at first about the food, the weather, the drive over. Then he asked, so how do you know the hosts? My son married their daughter, I replied. He nodded thoughtfully. Ah, and what line of work were you in? The question was gentle, genuine. I consult, I said. Privately, he smiled. So do I, numbers mostly. We shared a look of quiet recognition. Before either of us could say more, Lauren's father approached the table. Everything all right here? He asked brightly. Yes, the man beside me said. Very. Lauren's father looked at him more closely now. I don't think we've met. The man stood and extended his hand. Michael Hayes. The color drained from Lauren's father's face, not dramatically, but noticeably. Hayes Consulting, he asked. Michael nodded. Among other things, the air shifted, subtle, immediate. Lauren's father laughed, suddenly eager. We didn't realize. Michael gestured lightly toward me. I was just enjoying a conversation with your son's mother. She has a very sharp mind. All eyes turned toward me. I smiled politely. And in that moment, I felt it, the quiet crack in the story they'd built. They hadn't realized yet what it meant, but they would. Because once the wrong people start asking the right questions, assumptions don't survive very long. You could almost hear the recalculations happening in the room. Lauren's father straightened his posture, his smile tightening as he looked from Michael to me, then back again. Conversations nearby softened, like people instinctively sensing that something important was unfolding. Lauren's mother hovered closer now, her curiosity suddenly awakened. And how do you two know each other? She asked lightly, though her voice carried a new edge. Michael glanced at me before answering. We've crossed paths professionally, he said, more than once. That was all he offered. He didn't need to say more. I watched Lauren's parents absorb that sentence, replaying every earlier assumption, my quiet demeanor, my modest clothes, my polite silence. You could almost see them wondering what they'd missed. Lauren approached then, Daniel close behind her. "Is everything okay?" she asked, sensing the tension. "Perfectly," I said calmly. Michael excused himself a few minutes later, shaking hands with Lauren's father a bit longer than necessary. "We should talk soon," he said meaningfully, before walking away. As soon as he was gone, Lauren's parents turned their full attention on me. "I had no idea you worked in consulting," her father said, attempting casual interest. "What sort of projects do you handle?" "Only the ones I choose," I replied. Daniel frowned slightly. "Mom," I met his eyes. "We'll talk later." Lauren's mother smiled brightly, pulling out a chair beside me. "You should have said something sooner," she said, as if this were a misunderstanding. "We'd all laugh about later." "I was never asked," I replied gently. The smile faltered. Dinner resumed, but the tone had changed completely. Now I was asked questions, real ones, about my experience, my opinions, my plans. The same people who hadn't noticed me earlier now leaned in, eager, attentive. But the moment had passed. Respect offered only after status is revealed isn't respect at all. It's recognition of power. Daniel finally understood that something deeper was happening. On the drive home, he was quiet. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked eventually. "I didn't lie," I said. "I lived simply. You assumed the rest." He shook his head slowly. "They treated you like you didn't matter." "Yes," I said, "because they thought I didn't." That night, Lauren called me. Her voice was strained. "My parents didn't mean any harm." "I know," I replied. "They just showed me how they treat people they believe are beneath them." She was quiet for a moment. "They're embarrassed." "I'm not," I said softly. I hung up and sat in the stillness of my home, thinking about how quickly admiration replaces dismissal once people believe you're useful. But usefulness isn't dignity. And dignity doesn't depend on numbers in a bank account. The truth was finally in the open now, not because I'd announced it, but because it could no longer be ignored. And the next conversation would decide what kind of family we were really going to be. The days after that, dinner felt heavier than the night itself, not with conflict, but with reckoning. Daniel came over 2 evenings later. He didn't bring food or excuses, just himself. He sat at my small kitchen table the way he used to when he was young, hands folded, eyes lowered. "I feel like I failed you," he said quietly. I poured us tea before answering. "You didn't fail me," I said. "You just didn't see me." He looked up then. "I should have." "Yes," I agreed. "You should have." That was the truth, and I didn't soften it. Love doesn't need padding when it's honest. He told me how Lauren's parents had been replaying the evening over and over, trying to explain it away. How they insisted they were only being helpful. How embarrassed they were that I'd been misunderstood. "Misunderstood," I repeated, "or underestimated." He didn't argue. "What matters now," I continued, "isn't what they thought of me. It's what you allow going forward." Daniel nodded slowly. "I won't let anyone talk over you again." I don't need protection, I said gently. I need acknowledgement. That night, Lauren came alone. She sat across from me, eyes tired, hands clenched together. I should have said something sooner, she admitted. At dinner, before. Yes, I said again. Not unkindly, just clearly. I was afraid, she said. Afraid of upsetting them. Afraid of making things complicated. Complicated for whom? I asked. She swallowed. For me. That honesty mattered. I didn't pretend to be poor to shame anyone, I told her. I did it to understand. And now I do. She nodded, tears welling. I don't want money to decide who matters in our family. Then don't let it, I replied. A week later, Lauren's parents requested a meeting. Not a dinner, not a celebration. A meeting, neutral ground. A quiet cafe. They arrived early. When I walked in, they stood. That alone told me something had changed. Lauren's father spoke first. We owe you an apology. I waited. We made assumptions, he continued. And we spoke from a place of arrogance. I nodded. Yes, you did. Lauren's mother reached for my hand. We never meant to diminish you. But you did, I said softly, and intention doesn't erase impact. The table fell silent. I'm not asking for admiration, I continued. Only that you treat people with dignity before you decide what they're worth. They agreed, quickly, earnestly, but trust isn't restored by agreement alone. It's restored by behavior. As we parted ways, I felt calm, not triumphant, not vindicated, just steady, because the truth had done what truth always does when you let it sit long enough. It revealed character. And now that everyone had been seen clearly, the only question left was who would choose to grow. Change doesn't announce itself with grand gestures. It shows up in small, uncomfortable moments when old habits have the chance to return. I watched carefully. Lauren's parents began calling before making plans, not after. They asked instead of assuming. They listened more than they spoke. It wasn't perfect, but it was intentional, and intention is where growth begins. Still, I kept my distance, not out of bitterness, but wisdom. Trust doesn't come back just because an apology was spoken. It returns slowly, in pieces, when people prove they understand why they were wrong. One afternoon, Lauren stopped by unexpectedly. She looked lighter somehow, as if something inside her had settled. My parents invited us to a small gathering, she said. Just family. No speeches. No displays. I smiled faintly. And what do you want? She hesitated, then said, I want you to come because you choose to, not because you feel obligated. That answer mattered. I'll think about it, I said. That evening, I took out the folder again, the one with numbers and accounts and truths no one had ever asked to see. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. The folder had served its purpose. What mattered now was something else entirely. At the gathering, when I eventually attended, nothing dramatic happened. And that, I realized, was the point. Lauren's father asked my opinion on something unrelated to money. Lauren's mother listened when I spoke, really listened without redirecting the conversation. No one referenced careers or income. We talked about books, about health, about time. After dessert, Lauren's mother pulled me aside. "I see now how unfair we were," she said quietly. "We thought humility meant lack." I nodded. "Many people do." She looked at me with something close to humility herself. "Thank you for not humiliating us in return." I smiled gently. That wouldn't have taught anyone anything. On the drive home, Daniel reached for my hand. "I'm proud of you," he said. I squeezed his fingers. "I'm proud of you too." And I meant it, because he was learning something many people never do. That respect doesn't begin with wealth, and authority doesn't come from numbers. It comes from character. That night, alone again, I sat by the window and watched the lights of the neighborhood flicker on. I thought about how easily this story could have gone differently, how I could have revealed the truth sooner, demanded recognition, forced an apology, but that wouldn't have shown me who people really were. Sometimes the quiet test tells you more than the loud reveal. And as I closed the curtains, I knew we were nearing the end of this chapter, not because everything was perfect, but because the lesson had finally been learned by everyone who needed it. There was a sense of calm that followed, one I hadn't felt in a long time. Not relief, not victory, just alignment. The kind that comes when nothing is hidden anymore, even if not everything is spoken aloud. Weeks passed, and life returned to its ordinary pace. Daniel and Lauren settled deeper into their routines. I returned to mine, but the way we spoke to one another had changed. There was more care now, more awareness, fewer assumptions. One afternoon, Daniel invited me for coffee, just the two of us. We sat outside a small cafe, the same one I used to take him to when he was a teenager, and thought the world could be figured out in a weekend. "I've been thinking about that night," he said, "about how easily I believed the story everyone else told me about you." I stirred my cup slowly. "You believed what I showed you?" He shook his head. "No, I believed what was convenient." That honesty told me he was growing. "I thought simplicity meant struggle," he continued. "I never asked because I didn't want to be wrong." "That's a common fear," I said gently, "especially when discovering the truth means re-examining yourself." He looked up. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" I met his gaze. "Because I didn't want my worth to become a lesson you learned only after numbers were involved." He nodded slowly. "I want to raise my children differently," he said, "to respect people before they understand them." That was enough for me. Later that week, Lauren's parents sent me a handwritten note. No gifts, no favors attached, just words. They thanked me not for my success, but for my restraint, for choosing dignity over embarrassment, for allowing them the space to see themselves clearly. I appreciated that, but I didn't frame the note or reread it often. Closure doesn't require reminders. One evening, I stood in my kitchen, looking around the modest home I'd chosen again and again. It had served me well. It still did, I realized then that pretending to be poor hadn't been the act. Pretending not to notice how people treated me, that had been the habit. And I had finally broken it. As I turned off the lights and prepared for bed, I felt a quiet gratitude for clarity, for patience, for the strength that comes from knowing exactly who you are without needing anyone else to confirm it. Because in the end, this story wasn't about money at all. It was about dignity. And dignity, once claimed, never needs to be proven again. The truth is, after everything settled, nothing in my life looked very different. I still wore the same clothes. I still lived in the same modest home. I still spoke softly and listened more than I talked. But inside, something fundamental had shifted. I no longer felt the quiet need to justify myself. When Daniel and Lauren visited now, they didn't scan my home with concern or suggestion. They asked how I was, not how I was managing. When Lauren's parents joined us for holidays, they treated me like an equal presence at the table, not an afterthought at the edge of it. And I noticed something else, something subtle but important. They weren't just changing how they treated me. They were changing how they treated others. I watched Lauren's mother listen more patiently to waitstaff. I heard her father ask genuine questions instead of leading ones. Growth rarely happens all at once, but when it does begin, it spreads. One afternoon, Daniel asked me something that surprised him as much as it surprised me. "How did you learn to live like this?" he said. "So steady," I smiled. "By learning early that comfort can lie to you," I replied. "And that silence can either protect your peace or erase you." He sat with that for a while. "I don't want my children to mistake quiet people for powerless ones," he said. "Then teach them to look closer," I answered. That evening, after they left, I sat by the fireplace and thought about all the women I've known who shrank themselves to make others feel taller, who confused humility with invisibility, who believed dignity came from being chosen rather than claimed. If I could speak to them now, I would tell them this: you don't need to announce your worth. You don't need to prove your value, but you do need to notice when others decide it for you. Pretending to be poor was never the point. Letting people reveal themselves was. I never raised my voice. I never embarrassed anyone. I simply stopped correcting assumptions and watched what happened next. And that, I've learned, is sometimes the most honest mirror you can offer. As the fire burned low and the house grew quiet, I felt at peace, not because everyone had changed, but because I had learned to trust my own clarity. And when an older woman reaches that place, there's nothing naive about her at all. Thank you for being here and listening. If this story touched you, please tap the like button. It helps more than you know. Subscribe if you'd like to hear more stories like this. And if you feel comfortable, leave a comment telling me where you're listening from or sharing a small part of your own story.